big purpose is scarce. Only a few people can get there. Little purpose is abundant because there are a million things you could do that light you up. And instead of being all or nothing, it's kind of all or all. You can't really fail this. You do things you like doing, and if you stop liking doing them, you just start doing something else. So that's a big difference. And I think we look at things through the lens of big purpose, probably because of society and influencers and marketing that tells us that we should have six-pack abs and travel the world and have seven-figure businesses and all these wonderful things that influencers try to sell us so we'll buy their product. All these wonderful images marketers share with us so that we'll want to live that life and buy what they have to sell. The world tells us we should go after big purpose, and I think for a lot of people it just doesn't serve. Purpose is not about thoughts, it's about actions. It's how we joyfully do the things that light us up. What we're really talking about with legacy is we're talking about being happy with what we leave on the earth. And my argument is you need both meaning and purpose. If you don't have a sense of meaning, you never end up feeling enough. And so what you do is you try to make up for that with purpose. And so you try to purpose your way to happiness. You try to purpose your way to enough by achieving things, big, audacious things. We encourage purpose and joy in little kids, but after you get to a certain age, it's like, no, you have to be serious now. You have to become a doctor, a lawyer, or a CPA, or you need to do something that's going to get you ahead in life. You need to do something that's a career. And we effectively squash this version of people's purpose in them when they're little by telling them those are childhood things. A lot of my work with older people trying to find their purpose anchors is to remember back to those childhood joys before they got squashed, before they convinced themselves that those weren't worthy ideas or opinions, and they had to get back to building a career which they thought was going to be their major version of purpose.
Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
All right, Jackie. Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to FI. We are fresh back from FinCon. We're stoked about the fact that we went to a financial media conference and we got to present. It was so much fun. We were there with Jordan, who's our guest today. Seeing all the people, meeting new people, it was just really invigorating, right?
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. We don't get to see each other in person, although every week we see each other virtually. It was very special to see you in person, and also it was even better to see our guest today, Jordan Grumet. So let me go ahead and introduce him to everyone. We're thrilled to have him. He's a very good friend of ours, Jordan Grumet, and he is a hospice doctor, author, storyteller, and host of the award-winning Earn and Invest podcast. Jordan's first book, Taking Stock, was published in 2022. Now he's back to talk about the latest book, The Purpose Code, How to Unlock Meaning, Maximize Happiness, and Leave a Lasting Legacy. It was just released this month, and what better way to bring in the year than to focus on purpose? Jordan's journey from medicine to personal finance and purpose-driven living is truly inspiring. He's here to share his thoughts on finding true happiness, understanding the deep human truths behind purpose, and how to leave a meaningful legacy. That's something I want to do, Bill want to do. Jordan, welcome to Catching Up to FI.
Jackie and Bill, so happy to be here with two of my favorite people.
Yay.
Well, let's jump right in because I struggle with purpose. Jordan's journey is similar to my journey, and we'll hear a little bit about this during our show today. But in part one of your book, and you break it into three parts, you talk about the purpose paradox. And then first question, why is purpose a four-letter word?
Well, here's the thing. I wrote my book, Taking Stock, and one of the main premises was that purpose should come before our financial framework. So I went out into the world to joyously talk about just that, how we should be thinking about purpose first, and then we should build a financial framework around it. And I go to these conferences and I talk about my first book, and people would come up to me after the conference angry and pissed off. And at first I was just totally confused. People would say, look, you're telling me to find my purpose. I have no idea what purpose is in my life. I've been searching purpose forever, and it's actually making me anxious. I'm getting depressed and frustrated. Maybe there is no purpose. And the first time I heard this, I said, well, okay. But I heard it over and over and over again. It made me realize that purpose is a paradox. Like the studies, and if you look at the major studies, you'll see that purpose is associated with health, longevity, and happiness. There's a clear connection. It's obvious. On the other hand, other studies show that 91% of people at some point in their life have something called purpose anxiety. It means that when they think about their purpose, they get anxious, depressed, and feel beaten up up. Like they're never going to find this one thing that's oh so important to them. And so for many people, purpose has become a 4-letter word. And my premise of this book is that's because most people get purpose wrong. There's probably not one version of purpose, but two. And one of them is associated with happiness, health, and longevity. And the other is probably more of a 4-letter word and is associated with anxiety.
Well, you mentioned two different kinds, and you have sort of an acronym for this. You talk about big P purpose and little p purpose. Take us through those definitions, and that's sort of the crux of your book. We're after one, and we want to avoid the other.
So big P purpose, the kind that's probably more toxic and gives us anxiety, is very goal-oriented. And so it's mostly based on goals, which means it's all or nothing. You either reach that goal or you don't reach that goal. It's usually big and audacious, and it's easy to fail. And so it's a winner-take-all system. Like a lot of people, their big audacious purpose is to cure cancer or to become president or to travel to space. And you know what? There are only a certain number of people who can become president. There are only a number of certain people who are going to travel to space. So the likelihood is, unless you're the right person at the right time, doing the right thing with a bunch of luck, you're most likely going to be more frustrated or anxious than anything else. Contrast that to little p purpose. Little p purpose is not worried about goals and is much more worried about process. What do you enjoy the process of doing? These are things that light us up. Because of that, they're very abundant. So big P purpose is scarce. Only a few people can get there. Little p purpose is abundant because there are a million things you could do that light you up. And instead of being all or nothing, it's kind of all or all. You can't really fail this. You do things you like doing, and if you stop liking doing them, you just start doing something else. So that's a big difference. And I think we look at things through the lens of big P purpose, probably because of society and influencers and marketing that tells us that we should have 6-pack abs and travel the world and have 7-figure businesses and all these wonderful things that influencers try to sell us so we'll buy their product. All these wonderful images marketers share with us so that we'll want to live that life and buy what they have to sell. The world tells us we should go after big P purpose. And I think for a lot of people, it just doesn't serve.
I love that, Jordan, because I think I was definitely one of those people that always wonder, what's my big thing? I'm really young. And we get asked that question when we go off to college. It's like, oh, what do you want to do? And then you come up with something. My daughter, she would get stressed out about that. But I definitely felt that. I felt anxiety around trying to make it this big P when I think there were like little signals or trinklings of things that I enjoyed doing, and that it was sitting there the whole time and I wasn't paying attention to it because maybe I felt like it wasn't big enough. I think a lot of our audience probably think that too. Like, I don't know what my purpose is. What do you love to do? I think that's a good starting point. So I love that.
Jackie, one of the big problems is we believe that there's this one singular big version of purpose, and we either find it and live a great life, or we don't find it and all is lost. And there are really a few problems with that. One is it doesn't recognize the fact that purpose changes throughout life, and we can have many versions of purpose, and some of them can be really important and maybe change the world, and others might not do any of that. So that's first and foremost. The other thing is we talk about finding purpose, and I really like to change the conversation to building purpose. So it is true, there are things that were anchors of purpose for us, these beckonings, these inklings that we do want to pay attention to, but really it behooves you to build a life of purpose around those things. So it gives you a lot more agency. So the tougher question becomes, well, how do we find these beckonings or inklings? How do we find these anchors, what I call purpose anchors? And in the book, I talk about a series of ways of doing this. Just to throw a few quick ones out there, really simple. We talk about the life review in hospice, and I talked about it with my first book, this idea that when people are dying, we go through a structured series of questions to help them process their life. Well, one thing that comes out of that is asking about regrets. What do you regret that you never had the energy, courage, or time to do? Well, when young people ask themselves about regret, you just flip that around, and that's a beautiful thing to become a purpose anchor. So if you're regretting something in your life now, how could you build purpose around that? That's one easy way to start thinking about purpose anchors. Another is looking at your work life. Like a lot of people hate a lot about their jobs, but they find there's this one thing that maybe they do for an hour or two a week that they really love. Well, if there's something you love about work, even if it's not your whole job, how could you turn that into a purpose anchor? Another one is joys of childhood. A lot of us remember a time in childhood when we were supremely happy, and if you went to our childhood bedroom, you would see trophies, you'd see posters, you'd see drawings. What were those trophies and posters and drawings about? What were they for? What lit you up back then? A lot of times kids have permission to just joyfully go into purpose without worrying about outcomes or goals. So the joys of childhood also are a good place to find purpose anchors. occurs. And last but not least, a really good way is if everything else fails, it's the spaghetti method. Throw a bunch of spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. Try a bunch of new things. Try new activities, hang out with new people, do things that make you feel a little uncomfortable. And if any of those feel joyful and purposeful, build a life of purpose around them, or at least what I call the climb, which is purpose in action. There's these series of activities that we build around these purpose anchors.
You're a storyteller, and one of the stories you tell that sort of illustrates some of what you just talked about is Celia's story. Can you take us through that and her journey to finding her little p purpose?
Certainly. So Celia's parents were exceedingly successful. They owned a successful restaurant chain, and so they decided to give back to their community, and they set up a bunch of homeless shelters and places and soup kitchens and things to feed the homeless. And Celia had gone and grown up in this family and had spent a lot of time volunteering at these homeless centers and these soup kitchens. And she found it deeply gratifying, checking people in, handing out food, being there for them. This was a version of purpose that made sense for her. It felt good. And she felt purpose in those everyday activities in the process of doing these things in what I call little p purpose. Now, Celia's mom didn't do any of that stuff, but her joy was actually running the homeless shelters and running the foundation that supported all these things, except eventually Celia's mom died and she didn't ever planned to, but she ended up taking her mother's place on the board, doing more of the administrative stuff, doing more of the fundraising. And she found that even though her purpose in some senses was the same, she still wanted to feed and shelter the same people. In fact, her role was even bigger because now she was securing funds and helping build new facilities. She actually found that her joy got less and less, that the process of being there, doing that little p, handing out food was deeply joyful for her. But being in boardrooms and talking to donors wasn't joyful at all. And so it's a good version of how sometimes our purpose even gets away from us when we go from enjoying the process and doing what feels good in the moment to more goal-oriented purpose. Whether we feel good or not, or whether we feel we succeeded or not, really depends on whether we get some goal achieved.
And I think that's why I liked your storytelling approach to the book. We're voyeurs, so we love to hear about people's lives, how they turned out. You start mentioning them in the beginning of the book, and then you sort of reflect back later on in the book. And we're like, oh, that's her. And it's almost like kind of watching a movie. But I guess filmmakers are just visual storytellers, and you're one of the great ones, I think. So my question is, as you're going through the book and you're talking about the big P and little p purpose, I guess you gave us some ideas on how you recognize those. Some of our late starters, I don't know, I guess what does that kind of look like for some of our late starters, because they feel like they've come pretty far without doing what they're supposed to do? Is it too late for me to even think about what I'm supposed to do? What about for late starters and that purpose?
I don't think it's ever too late. I mean, look, I sit with people on their deathbeds and talk to them about their regrets and the things they wish they accomplished. And some of those people on their deathbeds do actually accomplish things in the days and the weeks they have left. So I don't think it's ever too late. This is the way I look at it. I think winning the game is spending as much time doing things you love and spending as little time doing things you loathe. And so none of us knows how much time we have on this earth, but it's a set amount of time from the day we're born to the day we die. And that time is made up of these time slots. Call them days, hours, weeks, years, whatever you want to call them. And so we have no control over time. It passes no matter what we do. We can't buy it. We can't sell it. We can't trade it. Time just passes. So what can we control? Well, we can control what activities that we do as those time slots are passing. That's it. We want to fill as many of them up with joyful activities and purposeful activities, and we want to get rid of as many loathsome activities as we can. So it's never too late to start looking at your calendar and working that calculus and trying to find ways that you can increase the joy and purpose and decrease the things you don't like. And that's as important in a 20-year-old as it is in a 60-year-old. You still have life left. Let's maximize how you spend your time for whatever amount of time you have left. And so I think it's never too late. I've seen 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds deeply invested in purpose.
Ultimately, we'll come to a discussion about legacy. And is it big L legacy or little L legacy, right? That's my new thing. And you don't worry about that when you're young. You start worrying about that as you get older. And that's what I find more and more becomes a conundrum for me. And you tell the story of Ricky, the lawyer, who gets lost on this achievement treadmill. And he's focused a little bit on big L legacy. And then that can transition into the story of Roman, who is pivotal in your life, and he embodies little L legacy, little p purpose. Counterpoint those for us.
Well, I think the way to really talk about this actually is to talk about the difference of meaning and purpose. And so, in my estimation, happiness is actually meaning and purpose. You need both of them. The problem is a lot of people don't know the difference. So here's what I think the difference between meaning and purpose is, and then I'm going to talk about how that relates to big L legacy and little L legacy. Meaning is how we cognitively think about our past. It's all about thoughts, and it's all about things that have already happened to us. People who have a good sense of meaning and therefore are happy tend to tell themselves heroic stories about themselves. Like they went through something really difficult, they had trauma, but they got through it, and that's why they are where they are today, a better human being. Unhappy people tend to tell themselves victim stories about their past. Bad things happened to me. I never could get ahead, and that's why I'm not ahead today. That's meaning, and that's your past. The whole point of meaning is to have a sense of enough. Like when you tell yourself a heroic story, what you're really saying is, I was enough back then. I was enough to achieve. I was enough to do what I needed to do. And I know that since I was enough in the past, I'll be enough in the future. Now, purpose is all about the present and future. And purpose is not about thoughts. It's about actions. It's how we joyfully do the things that light us up. What we're really talking about with legacy is we're talking about being happy with what we leave on the earth. And my argument is you need both meaning and purpose. If you don't have a sense of meaning, you never end up feeling enough. And so what you do is you try to make up for that with purpose. And so you try to purpose your way to happiness. You try to purpose your way to enough by achieving things, big, audacious things. A perfect example of this I talk about often is Elon Musk. Elon Musk has more money than anyone, and he's achieved some of the greatest things, produced some of the greatest things, and yet you look at him and he looks miserable because no matter how much he tries to purpose his way to enough, no matter how much he tries to achieve to prove that he's good enough, it doesn't work. Like if he really wants to feel good enough, he has to go back to his childhood and think about the abuse he suffered from his dad and being made fun of by all of his peers. Like that's how he's going to feel enough. And then he can move into the present and future, into purpose with joy. And so that's the big difference. Someone like Roman, who is practicing little p purpose, didn't have anything to prove. Like he didn't have to prove that he was good enough or that he was going to have enough of a legacy. He simply loved baseball cards. And so he built a community around that. And that community touched hundreds of lives. And those hundreds of lives that it touched went out into the world and touched other lives. That's legacy. You might call that little legacy, but the impact is actually really big. Go back to someone like Ricky, who was always trying to prove that he was good enough. No matter how much he achieved, his legacy never made him happy. He never felt like he was enough. So he kept on having to go farther and farther, achieve more and more. And I think that's where we get stuck. We dream of what you would call big L legacy, but I don't think it's big at all. I think it's actually based on the scarcity of not feeling enough and trying to prove yourself over and over again through purpose that you've done something with your life. I think a much more comfortable fit is to be like Roman, who pursues what he really loves, creates a community because of it, and that changes the world.
And Jordan, I think I really related to that story and the idea of enough, because if we go back to the 5 movement, people will judge on, oh, $1 million is not enough, $1.5 million. And we're so focused on this number. And for me, I had about 1.3 million. And a lot of people are like, that's not enough. You need more. But in my head, to your point and what you wrote in the book, I feel that I have enough and my cup runneth over and it is time for me to give back. And I guess that is so different for every person, but through reading your book, there's a lot of bells and whistles going off for me. I'm like, yeah, I felt like that. Yeah, that makes sense. So this concept of enough, I think, is a really big deal because you can't try to replicate what someone else is doing. So I love this example in the book.
Well, I love Roman's story because he's about the pebble in the pond. He affects a bunch of kids and gives them a safe haven to play at things they love. And it's more of a play. He doesn't need his name on a building. I mean, he doesn't need a rocket ship. But in some ways, his purpose has more of that trickle, pond-like ripple effect. And then it becomes 6 degrees of separation where somebody does something with their little p purpose that has impacts that as an adult come back and have impacted somebody's life where it's changed the trajectory of their life, right?
Yeah, and I talk talk in the book a very similar story, which I think really drives it home, of my maternal grandfather. I talk about him often. My maternal grandfather died in the 60s before I was born, but back in the 50s, when my mom was a little kid, he was an accountant. And my maternal grandfather, his version of little pURPOSE was math. He loved math. And so he would have my mom, when she was a little girl, sit on his lap, and he'd pull out the spreadsheets and he'd show her all the numbers he was putting in and which boxes and why. And she, as any little girl would, tried on that identity of her father, the person who loved math, felt that that identity fit her. And so she loved math and she became a CPA. And when I was a little kid, I had a learning disability and I was way behind my peers in reading. But the only reason I didn't think I was stupid or incapable is because I had taken on that same identity and version of purpose from my mom. And I loved math. So I scored at the top of the class when it came to math, even though I was at the bottom when it came to reading. And so my ability to get over my learning disability, eventually become a doctor, was all from this legacy of this man I never met. Now, in my first few years practicing, I was at the hospital one day and I was seeing a patient who kept on getting admitted to the hospital for life-threatening dehydration, and we couldn't figure out why. And I noticed a mathematical relationship between two of his lab tests, and we diagnosed him with a fairly rare disease that was actually simply treated with a medicine. He stopped coming to the hospital. He was a pastor at a local church. Part of what he did is he took in runaways and gave them social services and food, and if they were old enough, a job. So we can chart this guy who died in the 1960s, who lived hundreds of miles away, and his version of little pURPOSE is still alive today, 50, 60 years later, and some kid finding some relief from being out in the streets. And that was all because my maternal grandfather, a guy no one talks about today, that his name never gets brought up, is actually responsible for this change that is still ongoing in the world. And as Bill said, that is the pebble dropped in the ocean, the displaced water that just travels and travels for decades and miles and dissipates at times and becomes very small and grows and joins other waves at other times and splashes onto the beach years and years later in a distant land and is still having an effect.
So, Jordan, I want to go back to the first part of what you were saying, because I feel like it's truly unbelievable. I've heard you say it again, but when you grew up, you had a learning disability. You had to overcome that. But fast forward, you become a doctor after overcoming a learning disability. I think that is phenomenal, because we think about other people in our lives that may have had a rocky start and even been told maybe by teachers that they need to look for a career that's more something else, whatever the opposite of what you lack. But that is, to me, a tremendous and inspiring, going from where you started with your learning disability to becoming a physician. So I've always thought that a book is just an extension of the author and the writer and their lives. So you wouldn't be able to talk about all of this purpose and the things you talk about without having gone through your own journey. So that's a big part of what I appreciate.
And interestingly enough, the story of getting over my learning disability is actually a story about big pURPOSE, and shows that big pURPOSE can serve us at times of our lives, but eventually doesn't serve us long term. So my father died when I was 7 and he was a doctor. And so it became my version of identity and purpose that I was going to right this cosmic wrong of him dying suddenly by becoming a doctor too. So one of the things that helped me through that learning disability was the absolute certainty that I was going to become a doctor. And there's no way I was going to become a doctor unless I got through this learning disability. But as I got older, I realized I co-opted my father's version of purpose. I was going to change the world. I was going to fix people. It was all big pURPOSE. But even the big pURPOSE served me for a time. But then as I got older and burned out in medicine and realized that that was my father's version of purpose and not mine, I had to step past that and start thinking about little pURPOSE. So many of us, one of the reasons we have trouble letting go of big pURPOSE, and one of the reasons that we continue to be anxious, is at some points in our life, it serves us and drives us to do things that are very helpful, like find a career and achieve things. But ultimately, a lot of times that big pURPOSE driving us leaves us upset or on the achievement treadmill, where we achieve the thing we thought was going to be so great and find ourselves feeling empty at the end and needing to achieve something else.
So let's take a moment and summarize what we've learned about big P versus little pURPOSE. And you have a little diagram in your book that I like, and I'll just go over it. For big P, it's goal-oriented. It's the big, hairy, audacious goal. And it's imminently stems from a scarcity mindset. It's highly failable, not likely to succeed. It's lacking agency, and we haven't talked about agency yet. It's all or nothing, and it drives anxiety, and it ultimately ends up in disappointment. Now, as far as little p purpose, it's process oriented. It comes from an abundance mindset, and we struggle with this in the FIRE movement, scarcity to abundance, and this evolution. It's impossible to fail. It defines agency. There's incremental improvements and gains here, as opposed to the hockey stick major thing that you accomplish. And then it achieves longevity, health, and ultimately results in happiness. So is that a good summary, Jordan?
I think it is. And the agency point, I would just say, is to really end up fulfilling your sense of big P purpose. A lot of times you have to be the right person at the right time, saying the right things with the right genetics and a lot of luck. And we just don't have a huge amount of control over that. Whereas for little P purpose, a lot of times it's I try to do the thing and I either like the thing or I don't like the thing, and then I move on. And even if we do want to build in some incremental gain, usually whatever that incremental gain is, we have some agency over. So for instance, little P purpose for me is podcasting. I love podcasting, and I am happy the minute I get in front of the mic to the time I end the interview. So for me, it's very process oriented, and I love the process. That doesn't mean that I can't want to improve as a podcaster. I can want to become a better interviewer, so I can study other interviewers. I could go to Toastmasters or learn how to be a better interviewer. Those are all incremental gains that I have agency over, I can control. But if I make it my sense of purpose to get 1 million downloads in the next week, like I don't have a huge amount of agency over that. I need a lot of luck, and maybe even I'd have to do things that I'm not willing to put the time or money into. And so that's where we really get into that agency issue.
Now, there's a story you tell in your book too, where you can actually, little p purpose can back into a big P purpose that you didn't anticipate. And you tell us the historical story of Nicholas Winton, which I found fascinating. I've actually seen a movie about this story. Take us through his story, because he had a major impact in a big, hairy, audacious way, but that's not how it started.
So Nicholas Winton pretty much backed into a sense of purpose. During World War II, a friend had asked him to go to Czechoslovakia to do some volunteer work. This was during the internment camps and eventually the Holocaust. And when he got there, he realized he had this opportunity to really help a lot of kids specifically escape the concentration camps or get out of parts of Europe before they were captured. And he did this and volunteered and worked at this. It was not something he was thinking he was going to do. It was a perfect example of the spaghetti method. He just said yes to something he normally wouldn't do and ended up finding a sense of purpose in helping these kids. And interestingly enough, after doing this, he didn't really ever tell anyone about it. He lived the rest of his life. Most people never even knew about it. I believe his wife found some of his papers, and it was finally realized that he saved hundreds and hundreds of kids. And eventually, after his death, he was knighted for his activities. But he's a great example of basically the spaghetti method. He kind of said yes to something he normally wouldn't say yes to, which was volunteering to go help people in Czechoslovakia. And it ended up being a real sense of purpose in his life and something he really accomplished.
And Bill, I know you recently read that book, again, Jordan's book, so you liked it just that much, but there was just so many good stories. One that stood out to me was the one about the twins. It was Carla. Let me jog your memory a little bit, Doc G. And we call him Doc G as well online. But the story of Carla and Miguel, and they had the same upbringing, but very different takeaways. And I had 5 siblings, and I feel like we all had a different takeaway. So talk to us about that story. I thought that was pretty interesting.
So I talk about this in the chapter where I really talk about the difference between meaning and purpose. And we dive into what exactly meaning is, which is the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and how that affects our general outlook and our general ability to find purpose and happiness. Carla and Miguel were twins, and Carla was dying and Miguel was taking care of her. And I had spent all this time with Carla, and she told me this uplifting story about her mom had died while giving birth to her and how things were tough, but she always had love and she was able to build a life and a career and meet her spouse and have kids. And she told me this kind of heroic story about the magic of her life. And I remember very close to her death, I had a few moments alone with her brother, Miguel, her caretaker, and he told me the same story, but it was very much different. Instead of a heroic story, it was much more of a victim story. He told me that how horrible it was for his mother to die during his birth and how his dad never had time for them. And it was easy for him to fall in a life of crime because there never was enough. And it really occurred to me the difference in their sense of meaning and their ultimate happiness and success in the current day. Carla was dying, but she joyfully talked about her past and how magical life was, whereas Miguel was alive and taking care of her. And basically, he talked about regret and sadness about about what had happened to him and didn't have that kind of positive outlook that his own sister had on her deathbed. And so it really drove home for me the power of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And it plays a big role in our happiness. Again, happiness is meaning and purpose. And that's a huge part of that first piece, the meaning of realizing you always were enough. Life was enough. Life provided. But once you get to that version of enough, it's easy for you, like Carla, to jump into purpose, action in your present and future, and to live that purpose and feel happy.
Well, the next thing I want to jump into, because in the FIRE movement and in the financial independence, when we talk about money, and money becomes a purpose, which is not a healthy thing. In chapter 4, you say money can't buy you love, happiness, or purpose. Take us through what you mean by that, and why is money such a conundrum?
Well, money is a tool. And so we need these tools to live a life of purpose, but it's not purpose itself. And the reason why is you get to that net worth, you get to that place you want to be. And instead of finding all of a sudden everything is good in life and you're happy, you actually find that you have one of two choices. You either stop pursuing money, but then have no idea what to do with yourself or with your life because you've never looked deeper into it or what felt like purpose to you, or you just keep accumulating money, but then you're accumulating money towards a goal, which is just going to change once you get there. And so I think it's important to recognize that money is a tool, one of many tools, and we can use that tool to give us the time and space to pursue purpose. Now, remember, it's one of many tools. So you not only have money, but you have other tools like your youth, your interests, your energy, your happiness, your communities, your family. Those are also tools, your skills. Those are also tools which you can use to live a life of purpose. But money is a very strong one, and it can allow us, for instance, to pay for other people to do things that we loathe so we don't have to do them. We can use money to escape a job we don't like. We can use money to buy tickets for that trip so we can go see that ancient ruin site that we've been studying for the last years, because for us, history and archaeology are major versions of little p purpose. So money can do many things, but it isn't purpose unto itself. And if you worship money as a purpose, it's just like worshiping a goal. You're going to find that either you don't get where you want to go and you're unhappy, or you get there and you continuously are asking yourself what's next.
So Jordan, and I don't think this was necessarily in the book, but I've heard you talk about it. So when it comes to like money being a tool, and that's not the end all be all, we've gotten to the place where we know that. But I'm wondering if you've seen a difference in people that, for instance, are in poverty or don't have a lot of money, right? And how they see money versus somebody that's kind of over the hump of having enough. I've seen like there's just sort of a different lens that makes people feel different about money. Have you seen that? And what do you think about before and after?
So what I've seen is that people who don't have money often see money as the only tool and tend to forget the other ones. They forget their communities, they forget their youth, their energy, their passions, their skills. They forget to utilize those in order to pretty much build a life of purpose. So they kind of say, I'm stressed out, I don't have enough money, I'm working too much, I just can't do it. The other side is people who end up having enough money and realizing they have enough money, realize that it is just a tool, but then they have to do the hard work of building a life of purpose. And so again, to people who don't have money, money seems like everything. And to people who have tons of money, it almost feels superfluous. The truth of the matter is, it's neither. It's just a tool. And what your real goal is to live that life of purpose, joy, and happiness, to fill as many of those time slots of life as possible with things you love and as little things that you loathe. And so you use whatever tools you have available to you. So people who say, I don't have enough money, I don't have this privilege. It's easy for you to pursue these things because you're a doctor and you have money and you're financially independent, but I don't have those things, so I can't pursue purpose. A lot of times I try to remind them that it's just one of many tools. And if you start utilizing some of those other tools, you can start bringing more purpose into your life, and that will ultimately make you more happy. And to the people who are already wealthy, a lot of times I have to convince them that money has nothing to do with enough. Telling yourself better stories about yourself, about your past, getting a better sense of meaning helps you feel like enough. And once you're there, you can joyfully move into purpose, which is all about action and present and future by just doing things you love that light you up.
Yeah, I've been on both sides of this, and I wish that I would have heard some of these things when I was younger. You know, the internet wasn't around and things like that. But I definitely felt like money was the goal, and I just wanted to have enough money because it was looking like it was an obstacle. And now being on the other side of that, I see it completely different. And so I just think that's a very important point to make. And we have just so many valuable tools other than just money, but it's really, really hard to sell that to someone where they think, if only I made more, if only I had more money, if only a dollar amount attached to it. So that's a really important concept that I appreciate you always talking about when you do talks and things like that. And it was kind of slithered through the book as well, I guess.
And that's why we always have this vision of the unhappy billionaire, unhappy millionaire, because a lot of them are unhappy.
Right.
Because money didn't solve the problem. So if it doesn't solve the problem for Steve Jobs, it's probably not going to solve the problem for you.
Yeah.
One of the things you did in the book that I loved was you quote a lot of research on happiness. And to jog your memory, you quoted a study by Kahneman and Deaton. You tell us about the Easterlin paradox. And then there's a study that you really like, which is the Harvard study of adult development. Can you take us briefly through each of those and why there's such a discrepancy on what people think of money and happiness and what really results in it?
So let's talk about the data surrounding money and happiness. So the first study that everyone always points to is Kahneman and Deaton. I think it was in 2012 or 2013. But basically, they took a bunch of data that was collected for something else. They basically searched certain criteria of that data. And then they came up with a statement, a pronouncement that people tended to improve in happiness up to making about $70,000 a year. But after $70,000 a year, their happiness didn't increase anymore. That was followed up by Matthew Killingsworth, who in 2016 did his own research and basically said, well, it's true, people's happiness increases to 70,000, or by that time it was a little bit more because we were further along. But he said there are certain people who actually even making more money does make them more happy, depending on if that's important to them. And the increase in happiness was not as much. And so finally, Killingsworth and Kahneman came together and they all looked at the data in total and came up with similar conclusions. It's important to note that Killingsworth data was not based on a retrospective study of old data. What he did is they ended up sending text messages to people like multiple times a day for a bunch of months, asking them questions about how they felt, what their economic situation was, all sorts of information. And they based most of what they did based on 3 or 4 months of these constant texting people and getting input through questionnaires. So here's what I think. You can look at all that data and you can conclude what you want about money and happiness. But there's a much, much better study out there. And that's the Harvard Adult Developmental Health Study. Started in the early 1900s, took a bunch of people that were Harvard graduates, eventually widened it out to their family members, which was thousands of people, eventually brought in some people from Boston as controls who were not Harvard students. And they started by doing questionnaires every other year about health, happiness, wealth, income, all that kind of stuff. But over the years, they started doing more. They started doing MRIs on every person every 2 years. They started doing EEGs. They started doing blood tests. They started doing questionnaires of their family members. And after 80 or 90 years, they found that happiness was not most associated with money. It wasn't associated with achievements. It wasn't associated with your job. And even it wasn't associated with purpose. And I'll tell you why that doesn't change anything I say. But what they really found it was associated with was interpersonal connections. And so this to me is the strongest data. This is long-term prospective data collected over 80 years. I feel like it says more than the Kahneman, Deaton, and Killingsworth data. I think it's more robust and I think it's more accurate. Now, you'll note I said purpose doesn't cause happiness based on their study. But I also said if you look at other studies, purpose is associated with health, longevity, and happiness. What I believe is if you pursue little p purpose, it lights you up. And like a moth to the flame, other people see you being your best self and they connect with you and you become collaborators. If they have something to teach you, they become your teacher. If they have something to learn from you, they become your student. You become mentor and mentee. And that's ultimately what builds relationships and interpersonal connections. So I think Little P Purpose is a wonderful conduit to building communities and connections. And that's why I think it all connects with the Harvard Adult Developmental Study, because I think all of this is saying the same thing. Do things you love that light you up. It will connect you to other people and you will be happier.
A perfect example for me here is discovering the FIRE movement and becoming a creator as a podcaster. We were just at FinCon, as we mentioned before, and it lights me up to see the people that I love working with, talking to, and bringing content, solid content to our audience that appreciates it. It lights me up to meet new people in this genre who I may have met virtually or aware of from their podcast, and they're just so generous. This is the art of compounding to its extreme. As investing in purpose begets purpose. Investing in money begets money. And you've got to separate the two, and you've got to compound on both areas. And one of the things you talk about in the next section of your book is the climb. And this is how we do it. You have 5 commandments or rules of the climb. If you don't remember, I'm happy to prompt you, but just tell us your concept of the climb.
So the climb is purpose and action. So once we have these purpose anchors, the important part, because purpose purpose is about action is that we have to build a life of purpose around them. And the 5 commandments of the climb are very, very similar to what the difference between big P and little p purpose are. Basically, the climb, it can't be goal oriented. It has to be process oriented. The climb is something you can't fail. You go and you do it, and you either love it or you don't. And if you don't love it, you leave it. The climb really relates to incremental gain. We're not talking about big, huge gain. We're not talking about changing the world per se. We're saying pick things that you love, and then you have agency to improve little by little, like me in podcasting. I can become a better interviewer by studying interviewers. That's something I have a lot of agency over. And so that's the idea. Non-failable, abundance-oriented, process-oriented, not goal-oriented, incremental gain. These are all things that make the climb deeply fulfilling. And the key too is you can have lots and lots of climbs, and they can all be going on at once. Like, I love to read. That's a climb for me. I love walking every day. That's a climb for me. I love podcasting. I love writing books. I love public speaking. All of those are versions of the climb, but it's not like I just discovered them and I was happy. I had to take those things and then take action and build a life around them.
Yeah, and I can vouch for Bill. I really love his energy when we're at conferences, when we're doing the podcast. And I feel like it's such a credit and it's giving back to the community so much of what you're sharing by creating the podcast. The same thing for you, Jordan. The people that you are touching, I'm sure that's got to like help with that whole confirmation that you're doing something, you're putting something out in the universe that people not only do you love, but people are benefiting from. And so I'm just glad to be a little part of that, especially with you, Bill. So that piece of the book, I felt that, and it sounds like Bill really did too. So we appreciate that. So what about Bill? I don't know if you remember reading this. I know you reread the book, but the section about time is not a commodity and like purpose anchors was just a good thing that you brought up multiple times throughout the book that made me think about my own purpose anchors. So can you talk a little bit about those?
About purpose anchors, about time?
Well,
you're really good with time.
Yeah, I was about to say, I almost kind of compartmentalize those together, but let's start with the time is not a commodity and then the purpose anchors.
So if you look at our language, we talk about time as if it's a commodity. You buy it, you sell it, you trade it. But the truth of the matter is we can't do any of those things. Time passes no matter what we do, and we have no control over it. What we do have control over, however, is what activities we are doing as that time passes. And so that's kind of gets back to this idea of how do you win the game? Well, winning the game is spending as much time doing things you love and as little things you loathe as possible. And so how are we going to continuously look at our schedule, continuously map out what we're doing every week, month, or year, and continue to change things such that we do more that we love and less that we loathe? I talk about our tools, right? So money helps us with that, but we have other things like our relationships and our skills and our passions and our communities. But we also have what I call levers. And so there are 3 levers that really help us improve how we utilize that time. The first is the joy of addition. So we can add in something purposeful to our life. Even if we don't get rid of anything we don't like, 3 more hours of doing something purposeful a week is an addition, and it makes your life better. We can use the art of subtraction. We can get rid of things we don't like, get rid of things we loathe. Or if you're really stuck and you can't add or subtract, you can substitute. So substitute one job for another, substitute one boss for another, substitute one shift for another. Maybe you hate working in the mornings and you start working at nights. Those are all substitution, but those are levers that we can start using to maximize that calculus of things we love to things we loathe. And as you get older and older, you really want to skew the balance towards things you love and less things you loathe.
Yeah, I'm definitely finding that now. You, Bill?
The interesting thing you said there too is, and this is applicable to our late starters, is money is margin, and you have Andy's story. What if you don't or can't afford a good pair of climbing shoes?
So again, I think this gets back to the privilege discussion. So again, it's easy. You're a doctor, you're financially independent. Of course, this is easy for you. I say rely on some of those other tools that aren't money. So if you are 22 years old, you're working in an 8 to 6 and you hate it Monday through Friday, and you're like, I don't have time nor energy to think about purpose. I'll do that one day when I have enough money. I'd say, well, money's a tool, but you've got some other tools. At 22, you've got more energy than I do because I'm 51. You don't have a mortgage. You don't have kids. You know what? You could probably spend 3 hours a week on Sunday doing something that's purposeful to you that maybe is a side hustle. Maybe you start a podcast. Maybe you do something you like doing. See if you can make some money at it and do it for 6 months. So what happens after 6 months? If you're successful and you make some money, hey, maybe you can back off that 8 to 6 and make it a 9 to 5, or maybe it's a Monday through Thursday instead of a Monday through Friday. What if you can't make any money. Well, you've at least used the joy of addition and you've added in 3 purposeful hours to your week. So you're already ahead of the game. And so you have all these different tools and you can use these tools to help you get ahead. What's another way? Well, do you live in the same town as your brother, sister, or your parents? Maybe you hate your 8 to 6, but you're just barely affording your rent. What if you could move back with your parents for free? You've then used another tool, which is your family, to save some money. And you move back in with your parents for 6 months, and maybe that saves you enough money to work a little bit less. Or maybe that saves you enough money to put a little money towards a side hustle or put a little money towards investing. So the idea is, how can you use these different tools to help you get ahead? And so I think it is true. Privilege helps. Having a lot of money helps, but money is just one of many tools, and we can't ignore the others.
Now, we're getting to the crux of where this all leads. You have little p purpose at the center of a universe, surrounded by impact, legacy, and connection. You also talk about, yes, generational trauma is handed down, but, and I hadn't really heard this term before, generational growth is passed on. Those are a lot of concepts, but take us through your thoughts on this to sort of get us wrapped up into why legacy and little p purpose growth, where you affect other people by working on yourself.
So we talk about generational trauma all the time. And especially in the financial world, we talk about money scripts, right? So what are the twisted, mangled ideas about money that our parents hand down to us, and they become our twisted, mangled versions of how we deal with money? What we don't talk about is the exact opposite. When we do really healthy things, we model really good, healthy behavior, and we can pass that down too. And that's what I call generational growth. And so the story of my maternal grandfather is generational growth. He loved math. He passed that down to my mother. My mother loved math. She passed it down to me. And not only did he pass this script down that really served me, but I was able to use that script to impact other people and change the world. And so that's generational growth. And so how do we foster generational growth? Well, we practice little p purpose. We do things that light us up, and we create this model, not just for our kids and our kids' kids, but for our peers, our siblings, our friends. I wasn't related to Roman, but Roman modeled a version of little p purpose that forever colored my life. I partially learned through him what living a life of little p purpose looks like, and therefore I was able to do the same myself. We're giving permission. And it's one of the main reasons I actually say that people should not be your purpose. And people think I'm crazy when I'm saying this, especially parents, because they're like, well, my children are my purpose. And I said, well, your children are important to you, but if you develop a version of little p purpose outside of your children, they will try on that identity themselves, and you will give them permission to really enjoy life and pursue things that light them up. I mean, don't you want to teach your kids not to live for other people? You want to teach them to do things that make them feel special, that light them up, that connect them to other people. So you have to do it yourself if you want to pass on that generational growth so that they do it. Because you know what? Maybe your kids won't have kids. Maybe biologically they can't. Maybe the world will be in a place where it's not fitting. Maybe they'll never meet a spouse that they want to bring kids up with. So if your version of purpose that you give to them is purpose is taking care of your kids and they can't have kids, you're setting them up to feel horrible. No, we want our kids to do things that light them up. We want to give them permission to pursue whatever causes joy in their life and give them that freedom. And so that's what I think generational growth really is, and why it's the exact opposite of generational trauma, and why little p purpose brings about generational growth.
Well, it's really like getting back to the child. I remember a story you said in the book where you wanted to build a pool in the backyard. And your mom said, okay, let's do it. But you were 7 years old. And what'd you do? Go back out in the backyard and dig and make a pool?
We digged and played and had fun because I was young, and that was okay. Now, if I had said the same thing to my mom when I was 14, she would have looked at me like I was crazy. And I think this is a great example of how we encourage purpose and joy in little kids. But after you get to a certain age, it's like, no, you have to be serious now. You have to become a doctor, a lawyer, or a CPA, or you need to do something that's going to get you ahead in life. You need to do something that's a career. And we effectively squash this version of people's purpose in them when they're little by telling them those are childhood things. A lot of my work with older people trying to find their purpose anchors is to remember back to those childhood joys before they got squashed, before they convinced themselves that those weren't worthy ideas or opinions, and they had to get back to building a career which they thought was going to be their major version of purpose.
With regards to your pool, I remember distinctly at Halloween, and this is Halloween today that we're recording this, our kids wanted a grave to lie in and scare kids kids with the smoke machine and wearing scary costumes. And we had a little postage stamp front yard in Chicago. And my wife said, okay, let's just dig one every year. So we had some weeds in the front yard. And every year we would dig a shallow grave, and the kids absolutely loved it. So your pool is our grave, but that's something that our kids can carry forward to their kids. And that's the generational growth we're talking about, the compounding of joy, the compounding of little p purpose that we're talking about, right, Jackie? Do you have any memories like that?
Yeah, I do. But I did want to tell you, Jordan, I love the generational growth term. So I'll be using that going forward. And I think about a lot of our late starters when they think that it's too late for them to start. I always start going down the road of, well, is there anything you could do now that maybe your kids will pick up on, or they'll see you doing this and you're passing that down to the next generation? Maybe they could get started sooner. So that's going to be my new term that I've adapted. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of little ones like that with my daughter. We saw something on TV about Christmas, like the neighbor had all these wild Christmas lights. It was decked out. And then the house next to it said, they just put one little light that pointed to that house and it said ditto. And it's like, we didn't really want to do all that. So like, that's what we love to do. We prefer not to go all out, but we're like, look at our neighbors, and maybe they'll think that's the neighbor's house. I'm like, okay, I'm cool with that. But a lot of little ones, and that's sort of something cool to reminisce about. Like, what were those little things that you just did because it just lit your kids up or lit you up?
And I don't think people connect it. But for instance, Bill, you building that grave with your kids created a template in their mind of joy, of playfulness, of things that you don't know how or when that's going to come back up. Right? So do they have a joy for Halloween? And that becomes purpose in their life as they get older, and they create Halloween costumes or have a ritual with their own kids with Halloween where they build the same grave, and that becomes like a family tradition. Like, we don't always connect with how some of these little joys of enabling our young people to do things that are deeply important to them. We don't connect how that has legs, right? It travels through the generations. And they also saw you as a fun, playful parent, and that gave them permission to eventually be fun, playful adults. And so this is all growth, and it's all just a version of using little p purpose to grow and to enjoy ourselves and to help our children grow into healthy people, help our community grow. I think it has really lasting effects, and we get so caught up in we need to do these big major things to leave a legacy or to even teach our children. We have to teach them these big lessons. I don't know if it's that complicated. I think they have to see us joyful, and they have to be involved with us building joy, and we hand that down and they run with it.
I mean, it comes back to the principle of simplicity. You really don't need to make this complicated. Simple p purpose, little p purpose. There's lots of p purposes, but the pursuit of purpose brings happiness, joy, community, and creates generational growth. Is that a good summary of our talk today?
It is, and it's abundant. It's abundant and reachable. If I could do anything with this book, my goal was to take something very ephemeral and difficult to understand and difficult to reach, this big idea of purpose, and bring it down to a level where people could touch it and play with it and move it around and adjust it and realize it's not something pie in the sky at all. It's simple and straightforward, and it's something that everyone can do. It's right in front of your face.
And these are the things we need to teach our kids, because everybody in the end wants legacy, but it's not the legacy of your name in a building. It's a legacy that you carve on somebody's heart or mind.
Yeah, and Jordan, I found it fascinating that it was only 2 years in between the last book you wrote and this one. So you obviously love writing and storytelling. So you're a physician, you hold all these titles. What's your most proud title that you hold? The thing that brings you the biggest purpose?
Oh, for sure. It was being an author. I mean,
Yeah.
I had this moment, and Bill's probably heard me talk about this before, that one day I Googled my name, and there's a subheading when you Google your name, and it said author.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is the most seen I've felt in my whole life. And it took Google. Google saw me. So I know that that fills me with a bunch of joy and excitement and purpose, and that I love doing it, even the pain points I love. But if it got to the point where it didn't, it might mean it's time for me to move on. But for me, that's one of those deeper identities. And leaving medicine, which I thought was my version of purpose, allowed me to finally come to terms with what I think fit me better as an identity. But I had to have the courage to leave something that I was very successful at, that made me lots of money, that people knew me for, and yet it wasn't filling me. And it wasn't leading to that happiness. It was more leading to anxiety and frustration. So that was a big sign.
Well, you've practiced the art of subtraction as well as the joy of addition. You wear many hats now. You're a hospice doctor. That was what was left over from the medicine you love. You're an author. You're a coach. You have a mastermind, and you have a podcast. There's probably other things you're doing in there. You're blogging. You're on Substack. Tell people about the many facets that you enjoy and how they can reach you or how they can participate with you. If you want to find your purpose, you can have Jordan as a coach or work in his mastermind.
Yes, you can. And so the best way to find me or find out information about me is to go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can purchase both of my books, The Purpose Code and Taking Stock. You'll also find links to almost everything else I do. So the Earn and Invest podcast is there. I used to write a medical blog that's there. I wrote a financial blog. The Purpose Code Substack is there. And there's a bunch of videos and other things. So it's probably the easiest way to find out what Jordan Grumet is up to at any given time.
What's in your future? There's more coming.
That's what I was going to ask.
Oh, more books. And so I decided that what felt really much like purpose and would light me up is to write books for the next 10 years. Now, I started that pledge about 3 or 4 years ago. And so I'm on my second book, The Purpose Code. I have a third book coming out at the end of 2025 about our healthcare system, completely unrelated. And then I already know what I'd like to be in the series. Taking Stock was book 1. The Purpose Code was book 2. I'm ready for book 3. Hopefully, fingers crossed, The Purpose Code will sell well enough that I will continue to do what I really like to do, which is sell these manuscripts to publishers, traditional publishers, and start the process of the next one.
And Jordan, when does the book come out?
January 7th.
January the 7th. So that is a great way to start out the new year. This episode has been focused on the mental and emotional and psychological side of your FI journey. We talk a lot about the numbers and withdrawal rates and things like that. This, to me, is meaningful to your journey. And you kind of have to take a moment of quietness to think about these things. And that can help be the wind at your back with taking care of some of the hard stuff. So get Jordan's book, January the 7th. You can get it on Amazon, everywhere books are sold. If you like independent booksellers, they'll probably be there as well. But definitely worth the read. Bill and I had the honor of getting an early peek and we loved it. Bill loved it so much. He read it twice. But we appreciate you putting this in the universe. It is so important.
Yeah, I mean, Happy New Year to everybody and Happy Halloween. We're recording on Halloween, but you're hearing this after New Year's. So Happy New Year to you, Jordan. Congratulations on your book coming out the day after this podcast goes live. Any way we can help you, let us know. Our audience, just like Taking Stock, needs to read this one. It's very impactful and was very helpful to me. It will be helpful to you. Thank you today for being on Catching Up to FI, Jordan.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'd remind everyone listening, I feel so lucky because conversations I've had both with Bill and Jackie have led to this content, have led to this deep thinking. And so I just feel wonderfully lucky to be part of this community.
Thanks a lot, Jordan. And we will catch you next time on Catching Up to FI. So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. Our social media maven is Diana Falk, and our editor is Fritz Brizard. We love them, and they keep us going.
Yeah, Jackie, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community, and we hope you love us back. If you would like to support the show and our mission to help late starters, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to make a donation. The link is in the show notes and on the website.
Check out the show notes for resources mentioned in today's show. Also, head on over to our website at catchinguptofi.com and check out our vetted resources, partners, and affiliates for discounts and their services because we love sharing great deals.
Please share the show with others and head on over to our Facebook community to help us grow. If you prefer video, head on over to YouTube and watch the show there. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could also leave us a 5-star review to help our message reach others.
And while we are financial educators that love to teach, remember that our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
So, Jackie, we'll see our audience next time on Catching Up to FI. Cheers.